All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today is day two of Falcons training camp, and I am joined by one of the co-hosts of the ATO Day Ones podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, to talk about what's going on with the Falcons offensive line and why Mykal Walker is starting to break out this summer.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And we thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available Monday through Friday in a variety of podcast platforms, whether that be Apple, Odyssey, Google, or Spotify. And you can also check us out on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube. Hit that bell, hit that like, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So it's day two of Falcons training camp, and I'm joined once again by Jarvis Davis, co-host of the ATL Day Ones podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. We had Jarvis on last week talking about his major concerns along the offensive line going into training camp and some breakout candidates. One of those players he mentioned was Mykal Walker. And sort of we'll just revisit those topics now that we got a couple of days into training camp, starting out with the offensive line. Now, one of the things I speculated about, and others have as well, from day one of training camp, was that we saw Drew Dalman get those starting reps with the first team at the center position. And the expectation kind of was that we might see Matt Hennessy alternate with him and get those starting reps on day two. That did happen, but it was a little surprising to see Elijah Wilkinson getting those starting reps at the left guard position after Jalen Mayfield got those starting reps on day one. We did not see that switch at right tackle where Caleb McGarry's in the fight of his life against Jermaine Ifedi.
Right.
But, I bring Jarvis on so far. We're only 2 days into training camp, but,
Right.
What's going on with the Falcons offensive line from your perspective?
From my understanding, 60% of those guys, hey, they are in for the fight of their lives. They're fighting for a starting spot, and they even Arthur Smith even said so. He said, the expectation is for Chris Lindstrom and Jake Matthews. The expectation for those guys to be starters. He said they weren't set in stone, but the expectation is for those guys to start. Everybody else is up for grabs. And it was just like, all right, y'all trash. Who gonna come up out of the trash? Who's gonna come up out of the weeds? Who gonna become a flower? If I can use that metaphor. But I think the main thing though is that I think Jalen Mayfield doesn't need to be comfortable. And Matt Hennessy doesn't need to be comfortable because those guys were comfortable because it was nobody to even put in last year. Those guys Jalen Mayfield was thrust into that situation. Nobody expected him to be the starter. He was a guy that was brought in. Essentially, Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith essentially said that he was going to be a developmental guy. And, when you drafted in the mid rounds like that, that's not necessarily a developmental phase. Those supposed to be guys that come in and contribute right away. So we found out what Jalen Mayfield was last year. I think that they are expecting him, since they drafted him, to get better. But like I said, Elijah Wilkinson is sitting right there waiting just in case he didn't do what he needed to do in the offseason to get better. And I think that Drew Dalman is a guy that I think ultimately we'll find out once they put the pads on. But I think ultimately Drew Dalman is the guy that will probably end up winning that spot, because when you think about it, a lot of times they're going to lean towards guys that they actually drafted. So they hope that Drew Dalman, can at least have a much more potential, more upside for in front of Matt Hennessy going forward, because like I said, he's from the previous regime, and that kind of how things go. And as far as Caleb McGarry goes, he need to be in a fight for his life, man, because when you talk about your option not being picked up now, he did come in the spring. He did look a little more cut up. he actually looked like a professional football player. You know, you can tell he been working out and all that stuff. So it seems like he might be motivated. But I got a chance to talk with Jermaine and Fetty, man. He coming for a spot, Jack. That's it.
Yeah. So, one of the things I talked about yesterday was the idea that maybe Elijah Wilkinson isn't the best option to push Jalen Mayfield just because he doesn't really have that much left guard experience. We've seen him play some left tackle. We've seen him play some right guard. We've seen him play some right tackle. But he has a total of 0 snaps in his NFL career, either in Chicago or Denver, playing left guard, whether it's the regular season, whether it's the preseason. Do you feel like Wilkinson – is this a case of the Falcons saw something in Wilkinson and say there's this untapped potential that this guy can do something that he hasn't done before? What do you sort of see in this Wilkinson-Mayfield sort of battle?
To be honest with you, I see a breaking case of emergency plan. I don't think that's necessarily a battle. I think like the expectation for Mayfield to get better. Like, you need to be better. Okay, we brought this veteran in. If you are still as terrible as you were last year, how about this? We got this vet who's been around the block a little bit, and that's what you can ask for when you have a situation where you have a young guy that you drafted and he's still the same player from year 1 to year 2. And I think that's potentially what that is. Now, Wilkinson, he can show something. I think that there might be something there. There's always something there, I believe, when coaches bring guys in that they've dealt with before or they have experience coaching before. There's always some value there. But I think that when you think about long term and what the Falcons have traditionally drafted, they've drafted terribly when it comes to offensive line. And I think that for you to miss on a guy in your first draft, speaking about Terry Fontenot, I don't think that'd be a good look if Jalen Mayfield is just an absolute bum, so to speak.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. This is the position group that, you talked about it last week, that, this team's got to get better in the trenches. And this is the biggest question mark on this team. Like, we knew the pass rush was terrible last year, but so far it seems like they're making strides. They invested in that group. You feel good about the future of this pass rush if these young guys can be developed. But obviously that's not going to necessarily, like, Falcons aren't going to get 50 sacks, this year or anything like that. But you feel like there's progress, but like you don't have that same exact optimism tied to the offensive line that, oh, well, we just need these guys to develop. So I'm like you, I'm fascinated to see once these guys get in the pads, once they get on in some of these preseason games going up against other guys that are, fighting for their lives in other NFL cities, trying to put their best foot forward, how these guys actually look in games when they're going up against, real NFL players. No offense to the Falcons players in practice, but like you're not really being tested in these early training camp practices like you will be in the actual game. So I'm fascinated to see how those guys develop. We'll continue today's conversation here with Jarvis Davis of ATL Day Ones, talking about a player that he pegged as a breakout candidate this year. And we'll sort of see if Jarvis can sit here after 2 days of practice and say, hey, I told you there's something going on with this Mykal Walker guy. So we'll get into that as we continue today's episode, guys. But before we get there, I got to tell you about the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. Whether you're looking for the latest odds, contests, or player props, you can find it all at betonline.net. Whether you want to bet on Major League Baseball, UFC, boxing, esports, Vegas casino games, or now that football season is slowly creeping up around the corner, you want to put your bets on future bets, whether that's Drake London for Offensive Rookie of the Year or Arnold Ebiketie for Defensive Rookie of the Year. Maybe you feel great about the 50-1 odds that Arthur Smith has to be Coach of the Year, Marcus Mariota 14-1 to be Comeback Player of the Year, or maybe you're feeling nostalgic and you want to put odds on Matt Ryan winning league MVP. He's got 40-1 odds. You can bet on all that, as well as AJ Terrell, Defensive Player of the Year. All of it is available at BetOnline. So head on over to the website at betonline.net to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So I'm here with Jarvis Davis, and let's talk about Mykal Walker. Now, I said to you last week, I thought Nick Kwiatkowski would be the starter at that weak side linebacker spot next to Rashaan Evans, who I think most of us agreed and think that will be the starter at that Mike linebacker to replace Foye Oluokun. But you were talking up Mykal Walker. You're not the only one out there as a potential breakout candidate. This is really kind of a pivotal summer for Mykal Walker to really show what he can do, because you imagine, the Falcons have drafted some linebackers, Troy Anderson, and so like if he doesn't necessarily show out this summer, you wonder how many more opportunities Mykal Walker is going to get. But you've talked about his hunger for that job, and so far so good, right? Mykal Walker getting those first team reps in the first 2 days. You're not seeing that sort of rotation with him as you were seeing on the offensive line. So I'm curious, sort of, what is it about Mykal Walker that, I know you've talked about this before at ATL Day Ones, but what is it about him that you feel like he's now poised to sort of grab onto this spot and be a pivotal part of this Falcons defense this summer?
To be honest with you, I think he's a guy that kind of understands the game, right? Like, not necessarily the game of football, definitely the game of football, but just understands what the situation is. And I think that, like I said, we had a conversation, Tanisha and I had a conversation, my co-host on ATL Day Ones, just about mindset coming into the season. And I think that the thing that just really just jumped out at, he understood that you're not going to be given anything in the NFL. Like when you come in, when you get drafted, as soon as you get drafted, everything changes. You're pretty much on your own as far as how far you can go and how good you're going to be. Now, granted, you have the coaches and they're going to do everything they possibly can to do that, to get you to a certain level. But a lot of the next level stuff is really on you. And I think he really has that. He has that it factor. Just say, okay, I understand that the team that the coaching staff that drafted me is out of here. They're no longer here, and I have to prove myself to this an entire new coaching staff. I have to get myself. I have to change my body, right? Because he came in as one of those light flight guys. Deion Jones is a light flight linebacker, just light and just go. And he was kind of similar to that, but once he kind of understood that, okay, Dean Pease runs the 3-4, a linebacker system, those guys are a little bit more beefy. You got to put on probably about 15 to 20 pounds. And he kind of understood just understands that, what he's going to have to be able to do to stick around and stay in this system. And once he's able to figure out what he has to do to stay in, I think he's kind of really gotten a good grasp of this defense. And I think that he got a little taste of a lot of reps. He got some taste of some reps last year, and I think he's itching and hungry for more. And I believe that's why he's the type of guy that, you kind of look at when you're talking about, okay, who's primed and ready to have a breakout year, who's ready to prove themselves. And I think that Mykal Walker is definitely that guy.
Absolutely. Great points there. Jarvis, anything else from these first 2 days of practice that stood out to you?
You know what? To be honest with you, I think there was something that I found quite interesting. Tanisha and I were having a conversation about guys who could surprise, like guys who just come in, whether it be rookies or free agents. And she said something that kind of stood out to me, right? Justin Schaefer. And I was like, that's interesting. And then just, from after practice and, kind of talking to some guys after practice, and Chris Lindstrom, made a comment that, Justin Schaefer was a guy that had reached out to him, like, hey, he was asking for pointers and kind of seeing what's going on with this. And to be honest with you, I'm not surprised that he reached out to a guy like Chris Lindstrom, because I said from day one, Chris Lindstrom is a guy that is going to be a baller, and he's going to be in conversation for Pro Bowls. And I think after that fact, it's on him as to whether or not he wants to be great. And I think he's kind of moving into that level, and you kind of see that these young pups, a guy like Schaefer understands that and realizes that, and like, oh, okay, this is the type of guy I need to emulate. This is the type of guy that I need to get pointers from. And I think that was kind of something that I thought that was really interesting, that, you got a guy who's drafted in the late rounds. Expectations aren't really that high. If they were a little bit higher, they probably would have drafted a little bit higher. But, you got a local kid, coming from out of Cedar Grove High School, kind of trying to get some points, trying to get every little piece of information he can get, so he can, kind of have the upper hand on other people, and then once they put the pads on, I think that's when you want to get the classroom stuff out of the way. going in, and then for Schaefer to be able to say that, okay, here's what I need to do. I need to reach out to this guy, and then once they put the pads on, that's when it gets easier. So you won't be out there thinking, because a football player that's thinking is a football player who's probably about a half a step or to a step behind his opponent, and that is never good on Sundays, and definitely during the week when you're trying to prove that you should be out there at Sundays at 1:00.
Absolutely. And when you look at some of these D tackles that the Falcons going to face this year, they got a guy behind me coming in week 2, Aaron Donald.
Oh yeah,
and, Akeem Hicks
gonna
in
be
the
real,
division
dude.
now. So yeah, you can't be out here thinking too much against those.
Cameron
guys.
Jordan too. He out there. He moving around a little bit too on third and long.
So yeah,
Man,
this is a position group that we're gonna keep talking about. So Jarvis, you guys gonna see Jarvis on here a lot. We're gonna talk about this offensive line quite a bit all summer long.
We're gonna be passing out therapy during the season, Aaron. I have a good feeling that we're gonna be doing therapy on Locked On Falcons postcast, man. I think we're gonna be doing a lot of therapy on Sundays because, like you said, the offensive line, there are some issues there. Like I said, 60% of those guys are fighting for a position, fighting for a spot. 60%. Think about that now. That's quite a bit.
Yes.
And it's almost August, and we don't know who's gonna be at center, left guard, and right tackle. Yeah. We gonna be laying on the couch, man. We're gonna have y'all laying on the couch, man. We got you covered over here.
yeah, definitely. But yeah, speaking of that postcast, Jarvis and I will be doing that over at Locked On Sports Atlanta, breaking down all of the Falcons wins, losses. We'll be doing some preseason stuff as well to get you guys geared up for the regular season. So always subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta exclusively on YouTube. But Jarvis, let the people know what you, Tanitra, Mark, and John got going on at Locked On Sports Atlanta in the coming days and weeks.
Locked On Sports Atlanta is going on the road tomorrow. We're gonna be pumping out a lot of stuff on social media. So you guys go ahead and follow Locked On ATL and go ahead and subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta. We'll be having some stuff on our page over there, and we'll be dropping some videos, dropping some funny comments, some funny statements. We actually put out something this morning, like, hey, if you're tired of all the same old boring sports talk, man, come on over to Locked On Atlanta, man. Locked On ATL. Follow us for everything. And you can follow me on Twitter at JarvisD90. I tweet out some interesting stuff from time to time. And I'm not quite good as Aaron, with the snarky comments, because he got professional football players coming at him, trying to threaten him and stuff, man. So he can't go to Flowery Branch right now. It's still a little hot over there.
Yeah, I saw that Locked On Atlanta tweet. They had Suge Knight on that GIF, and I'm like, it was a great tweet, but I'm like, is he gonna be dangling people outside of balconies like he did Vanilla Ice or whatever back in the day?
No, we're not gonna do that, man. We're not trying to take nobody out, man.
If you don't listen,
that's not our style, man.
You're gonna be, you're gonna have your lives threatened like Suge Knight used to back in the day. So, I like that choice graphic. It's that serious if you're not checking out Locked On Sports Atlanta.
Yes, it's very serious. We're not gonna threaten your life, but it's serious out here, man. We out here trying to do some good things and talk some good Atlanta sports, man. We're trying to give you everything we got.
All right, man. So, guys, I got more to come. We're going to talk a little bit more about Dan Reeves and Tommy Nobis being Hall of Fame finalists and what's the process for them to finally get more Falcons in the Hall of Fame later this year, as well as we'll talk about Todd McClure being inducted in the Ring of Honor as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But always, as usual, appreciate Jarvis for joining me. So make sure you stay tuned for more on Locked On Falcons today. So as usual, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day, and always have recommendations for your second listens. Obviously, with Jarvis Davis, I got to plug Locked On Sports Atlanta, but the Locked On Sports Atlanta includes 3 shows: ATL Day Ones, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, A to Z with Mark Zeno, but it also includes this entire Locked On Falcons, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Hawks, local team podcast group. So, in addition to Locked On Sports Atlanta, is breaking down, local stories and national stories for all sports. If you want to hone in on the Hawks, baseball, etc., you can always find that here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. So today we're wrapping up today just to sort of talk about more historical things. With the Falcons having two potential Hall of Fame finalists, in this year's Hall of Fame class that will be announced, in late January, early February of 2023. That includes Dan Reeves, the late great Dan Reeves, who is one of 12 coach/contributor finalists, as well as Tommy Nobis, Mr. Falcon, who's one of 12, senior players, which is, the old timers and whatnot that are also finalists. And what that means is it doesn't mean that there's basically, they're now on the second to last step to potentially being Hall of Famers, right? The final step is, and basically how it works, as I understand it, is that, the various Hall of Fame committees will meet in, August, mid-August, and basically from the 12 senior candidates, they'll select 3 guys that will go on to be part of consideration for the final Hall of Fame selection committee that meets in early 2023, probably in January. And then those guys will be the true finalists, right? In the sense that those guys will have the potential to go on that final Hall of Fame ballot when it is announced in late January, early February. And the same applies to the coaching contributors, although it's not 3 of those guys, it's just 1 out of these 12. And so we'll have to see if Dan Reeves is that, 1 out of 12. We'll see if Tommy Nobis is one of the up to 3 guys that will go there. If you're not familiar with Reeves, he was the Falcons coach from 1997 to 2003, spent 23 years as an NFL head coach, 12 with the Broncos, 4 with the Giants, 7 with the Falcons. His 190 regular season wins is the 10th highest in NFL history. Of course, Tommy Nobis was the first ever draft selection for the Falcons back in 1966. There's an interesting story about like a bidding war between him and, I want to say, Houston, when they were in the American Football League, and the Falcons ultimately won that bidding war back when there were 2 football leagues. And he was sort of the first star player on the Falcons, played on a number of not so good teams in those 60s. I think towards the end of his career, you started to see the Falcons be a little bit more successful, but he was part of the all-decade 60s team. He made 5 Pro Bowls, 1 All-Pro, was a very productive player, played in a really, one of the reasons why Nobis hasn't necessarily gotten the love historically from this Hall of Fame stuff is in large part he played in a great era of some great linebackers with like Dick Butkus, and there's 5 other Hall of Famers that were like on that all decade team back in the day, and he's like the one last guy that hasn't necessarily gotten in it, which was a contributing factor to why he didn't make like 10 Pro Bowls or something like that. So we'll see if those guys get it. Obviously we will have an update on that particular front probably in late January, early February, to see if those guys make it. As for Todd McClure, he's not going to the Hall of Fame, but he is going to the Falcons Ring of Honor. They did announce that today on Thursday. He will now be the 12th member of the Ring of Honor. He'll be inducted into that during halftime of the Falcons. What week is it? I'm sorry. I'm blanking on what week it is. Is it the week 8 game? Yes, the week 8 game against Carolina. They play the Panthers like twice in like 3 weeks, so I was a little confused there. So yeah, that week 8 game against the Panthers, he'll go in the Ring of Honor at halftime. Then if you guys don't remember the Mud Duck, if you're a relatively young or new Falcon fan, he's spent 13 years with the Falcons after being a 7th round pick out of LSU in 2001, had 195 career starts with the Falcons, including 144 consecutive ones across sort of a decade in the early 2000s. And what's interesting about Todd McClure, and I think we touched upon this on a previous episode, or at least I looked it up thinking I was going to talk about it on a podcast. When you do as many shows as I do, they kind of blur together. But we talked about how Jake Matthews has a chance to tie Todd McClure's consecutive start mark with if he can start every game this year, he will match Todd McClure's 144 consecutive starts. And so, you're potentially thinking about Jake Matthews as a future Ring of Honor member for very similar reasons. And what's interesting about Todd McClure was recently I was on the Believe in Sports or Believe in Falcons podcast with Will McFadden and Alan Stirk. And we were rewatching the 2004 Rams Falcons playoff game, and the Falcons ran for like over 350 yards in that game, and really dominated the Rams in that game. And a lot of that, one of the things we talked about was how dominant the Falcons offensive line was against that Rams front, and there were many great blocks by Todd McClure in that game. And he really excelled in those years with the sort of DVD backfield with Warwick Dunn, Michael Vick, and TJ Duckett, where they were able to rack up a lot of rushing yards playing in that Alex Gibbs outside zone scheme. And I bring that up just because, when we're talking about a guy like Drew Dalman, like there was a lot of parallels between what Drew Dalman potentially brings to the table than what, Todd McClure as sort of that classic, undersized, but very athletic, very mobile, very agile sort of center that could go in and take out, linebackers at the second level. He did that throughout that game in that Rams Falcons game. And so you're crossing your fingers that we'll see a lot more of Drew Dalman doing that this upcoming season. And for those of you that checked out the all-time draft series back in early July, where Alan was on the podcast with me, and we went back and forth drafting, our preferred teams from all-time great Falcons. Alan wound up selecting Todd McClure for one of his guard spots because, the Falcons don't have a deep roster of great guards, but they do have a number of really great centers like Jeff Van Note, like Alex Mack, and Todd McClure on sort of that Mount Rushmore of center. So he wound up being on Alan's team. So, great honors for Todd McClure, the Mud Duck, a past guest on this podcast way back in the day. I want to say like in 2015, 2016, sometime around then. Great guy, awesome guy. It never really got the amount of love during his playing career that he probably deserved, but afterwards, particularly given, some of the issues the Falcons had at the center position for several years after he wound up retiring after that 2012 season, I think people learned to appreciate Todd McClure a lot more. So it's a great honor to sort of see his name sort of enshrined, not necessarily in Canton, but certainly in the city of Atlanta as one of the great Falcon players of all time, and it's well deserved for him. And we're hoping that Dan Reeves can be honored posthumously as a Hall of Fame candidate, and of course Tommy Nobis as well. So looking forward to see what comes of that. And that's what we'll wrap it up, guys, here today. We'll see, we'll be back Monday or Sunday evening if you're checking us out on YouTube to sort of give you the updates on all the things going on over the weekend at Falcons training camp. We'll keep you updates on some of these shuffling, starting lineups and whatnot, and sort of see if anybody's making progress, anybody else stands out. It's just hard to sort of, overreact to like when like this guy had a moment. It's like, okay, like, I've learned over the years to kind of be like, hey, don't overreact to the first couple of days of training camp because, and also like not being too gung-ho on like, who's popping on, this 6-second clip on video. Cause I just, in the back of my mind, I remember very distinctly, like back in 2014, Bernard Reedy was a guy that kept, generating all this buzz about how much he was like cooking the Falcons DBs all throughout that summer in OTAs and in training camp. And then we got to the preseason, and Bernard Reedy didn't do anything in the preseason games and wound up not making the roster, when I think, going into that summer, everybody was like, this guy's, killing it in practice. And so like, that's why, like, I tend to be a little bit more patient, a little bit more hesitant when it comes to some of these early days practice stuff, to sort of see, okay, where are guys at in like week 2 of training camp? What progress are guys, or guys, did guys flash a little bit in the early days and then kind of fizzle out as time wore on, or were guys able to build upon that? So we'll sort of have to wait and see. So that's part of the reason why we're not being like, oh, this means this and that means that. So we'll, this weekend, I think we'll be able to see a little bit more in regards to sort of what developments happened in training camp. So give you that update on Sunday evening on YouTube, of course, Monday morning on the audio version of the podcast. And always thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. Always check out other shows as your second listen, like Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs, and of course, Locked On NFL. If you want to catch up with all the latest going on for the other 31 teams all summer long in their training camps on Locked On NFL, all on the same podcast platforms you're currently checking out Locked On Falcons, guys. So I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you can stay cool, get out of this heat wave if you can. Be safe out there. And guys, I really appreciate you tuning in for another week of Locked On Falcons. We'll be back next week, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, for more Falcons training camp coverage. So appreciate it. Till then.